ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So we're continuing on with our discussion of Gadya Traya, the three Gadyas or the three prose works of Ramanuja. So we finished Sharanagati Gadya, and now we're going to have a look at Sri Ranga Gadya, which is the next Gadya, which is about Sri Rangam. This is Sri Ranga Gadya. Prayer and prose to the image of Sri Ranganatha, or the deity of Sri Ranganatha in Sri Rangam temple. So, number one, of our Lord, who takes his repose, meaning lying, in Sri Rangam, who is the Supreme Self and the Supreme Brahman, who has under his control the essential nature, the continuance, and the varied activities pertaining to the three kinds of sentient beings. So, sentient beings, there's a footnote there, which we'll see when we get to the end of the page, beings, and three kinds of insentient matter. So 3 kinds of sentient beings and 3 kinds of insentient matter, of the Lord who is unstained by any form of affliction, karma, or other such blemishes, who by his very nature and for all time is in an unsurpassed measure the great ocean of hosts of innumerable auspicious qualities, such as omniscience, unwearied energy, supreme lordship, changelessness, powerfulness, splendor, easy accessibility, love to all beings, gentleness, straightforwardness, goodwill to all selves, impartiality, mercy, sweetness of nature, profundity, generosity, proficiency, firmness, courage, and irresistible strength, who has all objects of enjoyment ever under his control, whose purposes are ever accomplished, and who is ever bent on helping all beings, and is full of gratitude of that Bhagavan in his perfection and fullness. I pray that I may become the eternal servant, whose sole delight consists in rendering all forms of service suited to all situations and circumstances, prompted thereto by the boundless and unsurpassed love resulting from experiencing him vividly and without intermission, without break. I, who have now become enlightened enough to realize that my essential nature is solely to enjoy the bliss of being his eternal servant, ever subject to his control, with him as my principal source of enjoyment, and to love, and with love to him alone. So here we have the explanation of the 3 types of souls and the 3 types of matter. So the 3 types of souls are souls in bondage, souls, that is the nitya buddhas, souls who have obtained release, or the muktas, or those who have gained moksha, but who were bound, and the eternal souls in Vaikuntha, the eternal seers in Vaikuntha. These are called the nitya siddhas or the nitya suris in Sri Vaishnavism. So we have then 3 types of matter. Then we have insentient matter, or prakriti, right, which is like physical matter, kala, or time, and the pure transcendental type of matter of which Sri Vaikuntha is constituted, right? So then we have C, which is the other footnote that we had here. He is full of gratitude. He's full of gratitude. God is full of gratitude towards those who show even the slightest devotion to him. Okay, so that was the end of the first section of Gadya Traya. It's a small Gadya. Why don't we continue on? I'll just start again from the beginning of the sentence, basically. I, who have now become enlightened enough to realize that my essential nature is solely to enjoy the bliss of being his eternal servant, ever subject to his control, with him as my principal source of enjoyment, and with love to him alone, destitute of devout meditation, bhakti, and the means to do bhakti or devotion, right? Consisting in right knowledge, which in its turn arises from right action, and devoid also of such spiritual qualities as goodness and religious faith, which are conducive to right action, I am without the means of obtaining eternal service to the Lord, which is of the nature of delighting in all forms of serviceableness, appropriate to all situations and circumstances, prompted by boundless and unsurpassed love, which arises from the enjoyment of all the hosts of boundless and unsurpassed attributes like his lordship over us, and by the thought that our essential nature finds its sole joy in being eternally under his sway. Sunk in the deep and impassable ocean of beginningless sins and their impress, which foster the growth of perverse knowledge and perverse action, with my spiritual light obscured by the irresistible maya or illusion of Bhagavan, which is of the nature of association with insentient matter, prakriti, changeable and possessed of three qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, or goodness, passion, and ignorance, which is hard to discriminate and distinguish from the jivatman, or the individual soul, like the gingerly seed or sesame seed and the oil in it, right? So sesame seed and oil, is difficult to distinguish the sesame seed and the oil that's in it. Or like firewood and the fire within it, caught up in the countless bonds of past karma, which are incapable of being loosened, and which are gathered in force as the means of beginningless ignorance, avidya, and finding no means of crossing the ocean, the sea of samsara, even in the endless future of my existence. I cannot see any means of crossing samsara. I seek as my aid or upaya the means, thy two lotus feet, O Savior of all created beings, O Narayana, consort of Mahalakshmi, Sri Devi. So the notes here, the footnotes here is first of all about the countless bonds of karma. We have note A. So in this passage, helplessness, or the consciousness of inability to save oneself, which is one of the essential conditions for property or sharanagati, is indicated at great length. A, incapable of being loosened except by Bhagavan himself. So except for the Supreme Lord, no one can loosen themselves from the chains of Maya. Avidya, or ignorance, the inability to understand that the soul is different from the body and other such defects. Samsara, which is a cycle of births and deaths. Sri Devi, another name for Lakshmi or Mahalakshmi. So then we continue on. 3. Though I am in this situation, I pray to Bhagavan that I may be taken into his service forevermore, with the faith that Bhagavan, who is supremely merciful, and who for merely being his suppliant, will bestow on me the favor of being taken into his eternal service, which is of the nature of finding one's soul happiness in eternal serviceableness, interesting word that comes again, to him alone, in all its fullness, prompted by love resulting from the enjoyment of the Lord. Notes A and B above. The performance of property or sharanagati, surrender, should be based, Sri Vedanta Deshika says, on the faith that God will surely save us, and should also contain a prayer to him for his succor, for his saving us, like that. So there'll be a little bit of a difference between the water glass and tank glass about whether we actually have to pray to be saved or not. Oh, but anyway, this is being said here. So part 4, by thy grace, O Lord and Savior, vouchsafe to me the duties of a servant impelled by the love that arises from the attainment of thee. I know of no other means of succor. So the note here is that Sri Vedanta Deshika says that the word dashata in the above passage means not the state of being a servant, but the actual duties of a servant. For by his essential nature, whether or not he's aware of it, man is a servant of God. And B, property here in this section. Property or surrender to thee is the only means available to me, since other deities cannot grant moksha, and since I am not able to practice the upasana or the process, the worship properly. But by saying no other means, the author may mean also if you do not grant it. So Vedanta Deshika says this, no other means unless you grant me moksha. So the Lord is the means, he is the upaya. So here, it's continuing on in 5, it says, may I become, O lotus-eyed Lord, one whose only delight consists in rendering all kinds of services to you in all situations and under all circumstances. I pray that you yourself will make me so. Although I do not possess any knowledge of the truth concerning the jiva and the Supreme Being, and do not have even the desire to know it, yet I pray that taking into account the mere utterance, this mere utterance, right, you will yourself enable me even now to have implicit faith in the true import of the words uttered by you, the words uttered by you, meaning the words in the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna, that he'll save us. So the note here is that the words are uttered by me, the words stating property and resulting in the privilege of service, right? So words uttered by me, words uttered by me means the words uttered by Ramanuja. So, O thou that art the boundless ocean of mercy, that art the savior of the whole world, without any exception and regardless of all special considerations, who dispellest the distress of those who bow to thee, who art the ocean solely of love, the ocean solely of love of those to those who seek your protection, who knowest all at all times the true state of all created beings. O you who are possessed of all things that are desirable, whose will is ever accomplished, and who art the friend in need of all beings, O descendant of Kakutsta, right, which is the name for Rama, O Narayana, consort of Sri Devi, Mahalakshmi, Purushottama, the Supreme Person, Sri Ranganatha, my master and savior, I offer my obeisance to thee. So considerations, the footnote here about A, special considerations, means here considerations like caste and status in society. And B, of course, Kakutsta is, as I said, is Sri Rama, the descendant of Kakutsta, like that. So that is the end of the Sri Ranga Gadyam. We can have a look. Let's see what, there's another version that I have, which is very interesting, the by Satyamurti Iyengar, which might give us a little bit of a Tengalai flavor to the Gadya. So this one, we make it a little bit less. Okay. So Sri Ranga Gadya, refractory notes. This is a Gadya of comparatively moderate length, comprising just 7 aphorisms, setting out briefly the theme elaborately dwelt upon in the earlier piece, Sharanagati Gadya. As already explained in the prefactory notes of that Gadya, that piece is but a commentary on the Dwaya mantra. This mantra consists of 2 parts, right? The Dwaya mantra is Sriman Narayana Charano Sharam Bhavadye, and the second part is Srimate Narayanaya Namaha. So it's 2 parts. The first part enjoins that the individual soul seek refuge at the feet of the Supreme Lord Narayana through the mediation, as a mediator, of the goddess Mahalakshmi or Sri Devi, inseparably poised on his winsome chest, his handsome chest, right? The second part stipulates that service unto the divine couple should be prayed for by the supplicant, by the person surrendering. Srimate Narayanaya Namaha. So the first one includes Sriman Narayana Charano Sharanam Prapadye Srimate Narayanaya Namaha. So those two basic meanings of the 2 parts of the Dwaya. The reader must have seen both these features reflected in a good measure in the earlier piece, in the Sharanagati Gadya. In this piece also, the first aphorism reflects the theme of service emphasized in the second part of the Dwaya mantra, while the second aphorism expounds the theme underlying the first part of the mantra. So the first aphorism talks about service, which is the second part of the Dwaya mantra. The second part of Sri Ranga Gadya talks about the first part of the Dwaya mantra, taking shelter, right? So here we have the invocation. So there's this invocation here. The Sanskrit we went over, I think, in the beginning of this lecture series. I won't go over it again here, but you can look back at it, and it translates as "Salutation to Saint Ramanuja, my exalted preceptor, with a profound knowledge of Tattva Traya, the three realities or the three entities, namely Jiva, individual soul, Prakriti, matter, and Ishvara, God or the super soul, and their interrelationship." Aphorism 1. The perfect Lord, the supreme being, the embodiment of innumerable auspicious traits, each of which is of unlimited dimensions, untainted by infirmities and imperfections of any kind. The sovereign master of the entire universe is reclining on the serpent couch in the holy shrine at Sri Rangam, visible to the naked eye of the worldly men over here. Saint Ramanuja, the supplicant, has been endowed by him with full and complete awareness of his greatness and grandeur, and generated in him is also an intense longing, in keeping with his essential nature as the exclusive vassal of the Lord. Vassal means a servant, right? Solely dependent on him, to serve the Lord in every conceivable manner, solely for his delectation, so his delight, right? Without break or blemish, without making a mistake, and completely continuously without any break. That's the type of service that Ramanuja wants. The saint now beseeches Lord Ranganatha to keep alive in him the deep yearning for such service and enlist him in his service for all times. The word Bhagavantam and the several epithets or names qualifying that used in this aphorism closely follow the contents of stanzas 4, 5, and 6 of the opening decade of the first centum, the first 100 verses of the Tiruvai Moli of Saint Nam Alwar. So we can check Nam Alwar's Tiruvai Moli, and we can look at the contents of verses 4, 5, and 6 in the very first 100 of the 1,120, I believe, verses of Nam Alwar's Tiruvai Moli. Expiating, right, or atoning for, right, any or getting rid of any of the expatiating or expanding, right, on the role of the supreme being as the great ordainer and sustainer of all times and beings in different states at all times. So aphorism 2, fully conscious of my essential nature as one ever subservient to you, from whom you could take any service at any time, and your great glory as the sovereign master and the repository of innumerable auspicious traits, there swells up in my bosom an inordinate yearning to render unremitted service at your lotus feet. At the same time, I'm painfully conscious of the bottomless depth of my depravity, the age-long accumulation of sins of all kinds, and a host of other infirmities, inseparably binding me to the wheel of Maya or illusion, with its constituent characteristics, which stand in the way of my being enlisted in your service, O Narayana, in sweet conjunction with Mahalakshmi, our graceful mother. You are the sole refuge for all your creatures, and I therefore take refuge at your lotus feet, so as to secure the due fulfillment of my inordinate longing for enlistment in your service. So he's asking for service in these first parts, which is equal to the last part of the Dvaya mantra. Aphorism 3. O Lord of infinite mercy, I, the frail supplicant, the very embodiment of all sorts of failings and imperfections enumerated earlier, implore you with full faith in your redemptive grace to enlist me in your eternal service, taking solely into consideration my inordinate longing for such service. O Lord, may you graciously grant me the supreme bliss of service at your feet, charged with devotion of a high order, engendered by the sweet contemplation of your great glory. I know of no means of attaining this end except your redemptive grace. O lotus-eyed Lord, you alone have to kindle in me the keen desire to serve you in all possible ways, at all times, under all circumstances. Aphorism 6. O Lord Ranganatha, by your grace, I now feel that I have acquired the requisite eligibility. So here, up until 6, he's saying he's praying to be engaged in the Lord's service, and he's saying that only the Lord can give him that service, can free him from what's binding him in this material world, all the accumulation of sins and faults that he has, and can take him and accept him and carry whatever he lacks into the service of the Lord. So here he's saying, O Lord Ranganatha, by your grace, I now feel, after praying to you like this, I now feel that I have acquired the requisite eligibility, because you must have graced me, the credentials for my enlistment in your service. So I feel the requisite eligibility, the credentials for enlistment in your service. Even if I'm wrong and still fall far short of the normal requirements in this regard, may you take this, my humble entreaty, as a passport for such service, and make good the deficiency in me which still persists. So even though he says, I am firmly believed now, after praying to you for your grace, that you've bestowed your grace upon me, and I've become worthy, and I've become qualified for your service, but I still feel that I'm not unworthy. So I want to engage in your service humbly. So please help me. You are the veritable ocean of boundless compassion. You are the protector of one and all of your subjects in all the worlds, irrespective of their merits and demerits. You are the great redeemer of the ills and evils of all those who take refuge in you and seek your aid. You are the vast ocean of tender solicitude for your devotees. You are the great cognizer of the true state of affairs, mental makeup, etc., in respect of each and every one of your innumerable creatures. You always desire the good of all of us. There is hardly any wish of yours you can't fulfill. Well, such a sankalpa means all his wishes are fulfilled. You are our unfailing friend in times of distress. You are the descendant of Kakutstha, again, meaning Rama. You are Sriman Narayana, the Supreme. You are Sri Ranganatha and my master, as well as my sole support. May you redeem and admit into your street fold this humble self, wholly subservient to you. And that ends the Sri Ranga Gadya. So now let's have a look at Vaikuntha Gadya. Sri Vaikuntha Gadya, okay. Sri Vaikuntha Gadya in prose by Sri Ramanuja. Having dived into Sri Yamunacharya's ocean of ambrosia, to the best of my understanding, I have brought from there the gem called Bhakti Yoga, and I'm holding it up to view, to look at. Sri Vedanta Desika points out that the word Bhakti Yoga used above should not be taken to mean the Bhakti Yoga as understood from the Gita, since it would be inconsistent with the description of property that follows immediately afterwards. It should be understood as meaning contemplation of Bhagavan as an end in itself. And as Ramanuja said in the Sri Bhashya, just this type of bhakti is a union with God through unending, uninterrupted contemplation, like the flow of oil from one vessel to another. So he says here, we just continue like this. So I have dived into Sri Yamuna's, meaning Sri Yamunacharya was Ramanuja's inspiration. He was his Parama Guru, and he was his Shiksha Guru, and so he has an inspiration from Yamunacharya by reading Yamunacharya's books like the Stotra Ratna and his Gitartha Sangraha, by reading the instructions of Yamunacharya. So I dived into Sri Yamunacharya's ocean of ambrosia to the best of my understanding. I have brought from there the gem called Bhakti Yoga and am holding it up to view. Having accepted as one's master, one's well-wisher, and one's spiritual guide, the Supreme Person, Bhagavan Sriman Narayana, under whose control are the essential nature, the continuance, and the varied activities of the three kinds of sentient beings, and the three kinds of insentient beings, who is not in the least tainted by any form of blemish, like suffering and karma, who is the great ocean, by his very nature, of hosts of countless and auspicious attributes like omniscience, unwearied energy, lordship, changelessness, powerfulness, and splendor in boundless and unsurpassed measure, and stimulated by the sole desire to serve his lotus-like feet with exclusive and intense devotion, and with the conviction that there is no means for me of attaining it, even in thousands of millions of kalpas, other than by sharanagati or property at his lotus feet, with no other means of sustenance in life except him, the Supreme Lord, and with all one's mental and spiritual thoughts centered on him, Sriman Narayana, one should seek as refuge the two lotus feet of Bhagavan Narayana alone, who is the unique ocean of compassion of all beings, who is infinitely helpful by the nature of all beings, regardless of all considerations concerning their varied qualities, virtues, and vices, who by virtue of his nature, boundless and unsurpassed goodness, is ever bent on giving delight to all beings like the celestials, animals, and men, who is the ocean solely of love to all who depend on him, whose only enjoyment consists in the embrace of his devotees, who is rich in all the requisites of eternal enjoyment like wisdom, action, and lordship, and who possesses all glorious things and is the consort of Sri Devi, Mahalakshmi. Then every day for spiritual regeneration, one should reflect as follows. In that supremely blissful divine world called Vaikuntha, which is beyond all the multitudinous causes and effects comprising the sphere of the universe, with its 14 worlds and 7 concentric sheaths which encircle it, and whose magnitude is 10 times as great. Right, so the conception in Puranic cosmology is that the universe is covered by 7 layers, and they're each 10 times as great as the layer before them, working from the inside out. In that region, we should be supremely blissful, divine world called Vaikuntha, right? Which is beyond the material world, basically. In that region called the supreme Vyoman or heaven, Vaikuntha, right? Which is beyond the speech and beyond the mind of Brahma and the other devatas, right? Which is filled with countless high-souled divine beings whose nature and splendor cannot even be imagined by Sanaka, one of the 4 sages, Brahma, Shiva, and others, who are eternal in their existence and whose sole enjoyment consists of pleasing Bhagavan. This is the Nityasuris in Sri Vaikuntha, in that vast and divine region which defies estimation, even by them, as to its extent, its wealth, and its character, which is surrounded by hundreds of thousands of envelopments, and is adorned with divine wish-fulfilling kalpaka trees, and enclosed within hundreds of thousands of millions of divine pleasure grounds, and in a brilliant audience hall within an immeasurable extensive abode resplendent with dazzling gems of various kinds, and beautified by hundreds and thousands of millions of columns inlaid with wonderful gems, whose floor is decorated with varied and radiant gems, which is ornamented with supremely beautiful festoon-like banners, flags, and encircled by wonderful flower gardens rich with charming flowers of various hues and fragrance, some fallen all around, some in the act of falling, and still some remaining on the trees, and surrounded by hundreds of thousands of enchanting parks, having a great variety of such trees as Parijata, which is the night queen, fragrant flower, and Kalpaka, or the wish-fulfilling tree, and dotted here and there with hundreds of thousands of pleasure resorts in the form of halls built with inlaid work ornamented with flowers and gems, and adorned also with hundreds of thousands of artificial pleasure mounds, which, though always enjoyed, appear as lovely and new as ever before, some of which are solely for the enjoyment of Sriman Narayana, and some solely for the enjoyment of Mahalakshmi, while others are intended for both in common, where are heard always the sweet notes of parrots, minor birds, peacocks, quails, and other birds, and having also hundreds of thousands of pleasant, fragrant tanks or ponds, with steps made of gems, pearls, and coral, and charming to on account of their pellucid water or calm water, having the taste of nectar, and on account of the beautiful water birds cooing with sweet notes, the ponds having in their midst pleasure resorts radiant with inlaid pearls, and with groups of white swans swimming all around. Therein, that hall, which is surrounded by all of these other magnificent gardens and groves and places, right? That particular great hall with the thousands of millions of columns, right? On a large and beautiful couch ornamented by encircling pleasances which enchant with unsurpassed delight, whose entering into them by their loveliness and by their countless number, with couches there and here and there covered but with beautiful flowers, and with swarms of bees singing in sweet and varied notes, being intoxicated by tasting the honey of the flowers of all kinds, and with a gentle breeze bringing with it the sweet odors of sandal, aguru, camphor, and charming flowers, there on that big, beautiful couch, decorated in the middle of the clusters of beautiful flowers, seated on the body of the serpent Ananta at the side of Lakshmi, who fills the world of Vaikuntha and all else, and all its divine wealth of appurtenances, with the splendor of her form, and gives orders to all the servants like Adishesha and Vishvaksena to render the services due to the Lord in various states and situations, and who is in every way worthy of him by her nature, beauty, character, and charms. There, beholding with rapt meditation on that couch, Sriman Bhagavan Narayana, whose two eyes resemble two freshly blossomed lotuses, whose complexion is like that of a black, bright cloud, who is dressed in dazzling yellow raiment or clothes, who makes the whole universe radiant with the sapphire-like light of his complexion, clear, spotless, cool, and bright, who is the wonderful, divine, nectareous ocean of eternal youth and eternal beauty, transcending the imagination, whose beautiful ringlets of hair hang down on his broad forehead, which seems to perspire slightly on account of the extreme softness, whose eyes are beautiful like the full-blown lotus, whose eyebrows have a charming grace, whose lips are radiant and have a bright smile, whose tender cheeks and prominent nose are entrancing, on whose conch-like neck hang graceful locks of hair, and from whose ears hang pendants over his high and strong shoulders, so the earrings, so whose forearms extending up to the knees reveal their contact with the loosened knot of his consort's hair, and with the gems and flowers she wears in her lovely ears, whose ruddy palms, whose red palms are adorned with the soft and beautiful lines, whose fingers, brilliant with beautiful rings, shine rosy and have fine, soft nails, whose 2 feet resemble lotuses, which have blossomed just then, who is adorned with ornaments wonderfully fragrant and extremely pleasing to the touch, such as the brilliant crown and other gems on the head, earrings shaped like the shark, necklaces, garlands of pearls, armlets, bracelets, the Srivatsa, the gem Kostuba, a girdle made of chains of pearls, raiment of yellow silk, a waistband of gold and anklets, who looks enchantingly beautiful on account of the garland worn by him of wildflowers and leaves, who is ever attended by his divine weapons like the conch, the discus, the club, the sword, the bow, sharanga. There on that couch, having visualized the yogic concentration, Bhagavan Sriman Narayana, who has entrusted all the responsibilities of his own supreme lordship to Sri Vishvaksena, who, by his mere will, accomplishes such things as creation, the maintenance, and the dissolution of the world. Sriman Narayana, who is served by countless attendants like Garuda, who are absolutely free from all worldly inclinations and are eternally blessed to him, being competent to render service to the Lord and finding their sole happiness in each rendering his respective service. Sriman Narayana, who the fullness of his bliss is unaware of the passage of time and fills the universe with joy by his pure, gentle, and divine look, and who fills the innermost part of the hearts of all beings with the nectar of his divine and charming speech, pregnant with divine import and emerging from his slightly opened mouth, which resembles the half-blown lotus, and imparting beauty to his lovely lotus-like face, and charming on account of the hosts of boundless graces such as dignity, generosity, beauty, and sweetness, and having realized also Bhagavan's being one's eternal master and one's being his eternal servant, just as they really are, one should promote in oneself the eager longing to serve Bhagavan by saying within oneself, when shall I see with my eyes Bhagavan Narayana, who's the ruler of my race, the deity of my race, the riches of my race, the source of my bliss, my mother, my father, and my all? When shall I contact with my head the two lotus-like feet of Bhagavan? When shall I enter his two lotus feet with the desire to serve there, dispelling all craving for other forms of enjoyment and every manifestation of worldly disposition? When shall I, having become fit to serve at Bhagavan's lotus feet and having that service as my sole joy, render service at his feet? When will the Lord look at me with his cool glance of his eyes and command me with his sweet voice, cool, pleasant, and deep, to render him service? Saying these words and having developed this eager longing, and with that longing increased in intensity by his favor, one should approach Sriman Narayana and even from a distance prostrate before him, seated with Sri Lakshmi on his body, on the body of the serpent Shesha, and attended by Garuda and others, and say, I bow to Sriman Narayana, attended by his retinue, and then rise and again prostrate, and rise and prostrate again and again, and bow down with intense excitement and reverence, and looked at with kindly eyes full of sympathy by the keepers of the gate, such as Jai and Vijay, who are the chiefs of the Bhagwan's hosts and attendants and ministers. One should approach Bhagwan with the permission of these keepers of the gates, duly saluted, and with the utterance of the Sri Mula Mantra, Astakshara, Om Namo Narayanaya, prostrate before him with this prayer, accept me into thy exclusive and eternal service, and thus offer oneself to Bhagavan. So this is describing how what the soul should do upon reaching Sri Vaikuntham. Then, looked at by Bhagavan with his glance capable of causing one's spiritual rebirth and full of overflowing goodness and love, and being taken by him into his wholehearted and loyal service in all places, at all times, and in all situations. And with his approval, one should serve him with great awe and humility and worship him with folded hands. Then, experiencing the unique fervor of emotion appropriate to the occasion and unable, owing to the boundless love, to do, to see, or to remember anything else, one should again pray for the favor of being the Lord's servant and remain gazing at him with the stream of uninterrupted vision. Then, being called by Sriman Narayana himself with a smile and looked on with his life-giving glance, one should meditate on his two lotus feet placed on one's head, feet that dispel all suffering and confer unsurpassed joy, and then remaining happy with all one's limbs sunk in the ocean of nectar. So let us see how what's spoken about by Satyamurti Iyengar about this Gadya. Sri Vaikuntha Gadya. So it is a matter of common knowledge that men of exalted stature usually mingled with only those of like stature, and hardly take any notice of others in lower strata in society. So in any case, they would be very critical about the company of base men, of low men, devoid of good character and conduct. Rather, they would be loath, they would not like to mix with them and risk their reputation. Saint Ramanuja was, however, very much out of the ordinary run of mankind. Like unto those dwelling in summer mansions in the midst of the orchards cool and lovely, Saint Ramanuja could have jolly well led a cozy life confined to the exhilarating company of his staunch devotees, expounding to them the greatness and grandeur of Vaishnavism. In that case, he would have been little better than the palmyra tree, casting but a mere shade, right? So, just giving shade. Actually, he was like the classical karpaka, a wish fulfilling tree, a wish yielding tree, or the better known banyan tree, casting plenty of shade and providing ample shelter to many a weary traveler. The remarkable compassion of the saint and his extreme solicitude for humanity at large, having been brought out in the introduction to the first piece, Sharanagati Gadya itself, but then that piece in his direct petition to the Lord, placing in the forefront his own shortcomings and failings of all sorts, and invoking his sweet spontaneous grace in the exercise of that outstanding trait, namely tender solicitude, Vatsalya, for his redemption and enlistment in his eternal servant, the Supreme Lord Srimanarayana's eternal service in the yonder heaven, Sri Vaikuntha. This was followed by the saint's supplication in the middle piece, meaning after Sharanagati Gadya, Sri Ranga Gadya, by the saint's supplication in the middle piece, pointed at the feet of Sri Lord Ranganatha in Sri Rangam, the very picture of simplicity, easy accessibility galore, where all the Alwar saints had also taken refuge. All the Alwars have prayed to Sri Lord Ranganatha in Sri Rangam. In this last piece, the Vaikuntha Gadya, the saint plays the role of the spiritual alchemist or chemist, attempting to transmute the folks, in attempting to take all of the lowly people of this world all around into his own likeness through the dissertation on the ultimate goal to be attained by everyone and the means for attaining it. The first 6 aphorisms indicate the refuge at the Lord's feet as the means for attaining him, banking on his innumerable auspicious traits of easy accessibility, loving condescension, tender solicitude, etc., and expatiate on his exquisite form, noble attributes, glorious possessions, and overlordship of the universe in the remaining 4 aphorisms of this Vaikuntha Gadya. The saint Ramanuja vividly portrays the glory and grandeur of the goal to be attained, presenting the vivid picture of high heaven in all its details before the mind's eye, and the supplicant's ascent to the eternal land of unalloyed bliss, where the Lord admits him into his sweet fold. So 2 parts: the first 6 and the last 4th. So we have an invocation here to which he's mentioning, Yamunarya Shuddha Ambodima Vagaya Yatamati Adaya Bhakti Yogakyam Ratnam Samdar Sayam Yaham. So diving deep into the nectarian ocean of Saint Yamunacharya or Yamunarya, extract do I the gem of Bhakti Yoga to the best of my understanding and purvey it to the yearning devotees. Hence, Bhakti Yoga is but Sadhya Bhakti, or property, surrender to the Lord's sweet spontaneous grace in the light of what is expressly spelt out in the first aphorism, namely that there is no means of attaining the desired goal of eternal service to the Lord in heaven other than seeking refuge in his lovely pair of feet, even if one strives over a millennium. Tat praptaye cha, tat padam bujadvaye, prapatehe, anyatra me kalpakoti, sahasrenapi, sadhanam astiti manavaha. For men, right? There's no way, there's no other way but property, right? To surrendering to the two divine feet of the Lord. So, aphorism 1. The supplicant has to the supplicant has to contemplate side by side the utter bankruptcy of any equipment in him for the attainment of the Lord. So any qualification that he has to realize that he has none. The highest goal and the very antithesis thereof, namely the all-knowing, all-powerful, supreme being, the Lord of heaven, who wants of any kind the fountainhead of innumerable auspicious traits, of supernal form, of bewitching charm, with an inborn grace of its own, banking wholly on the Lord's auspicious traits of easy accessibility, loving condescension, tender solicitude, etc. The supplicant is required to take sole refuge in his lotus feet. Although taking refuge in the Lord but once, as the sole means of attaining him, will suffice, the supplicant shall not rest on his oars, but keep contemplating his all-around greatness and grandeur all of his life, literally subsisting on such sweet contemplation so as to prevent the onset of worldly distractions, turning his attention away from God. This describes the manner of ascent of the supplicant to the high heaven through the specially earmarked route called the Archiradi Marga, far above the mundane worlds and much beyond their periphery. His entry into that transcendental abode, Paravyoma or Sri Vaikuntham, right, making due obeisance at the appropriate centers, the grandeur of that eternal land of enormous extent, with its amazing wealth and many-sided splendor, thousands of majestic parapet walls of incomparable excellence, a vast multitude of enchanting gardens and orchards, well laid out and abounding in ultra-mundane, means transcendental, right, fauna and flora, right, animals and plants, birds noted for melody and sweet looks, plants, trees like the carpica or the wish-yielding tree, etc., and flowers wafting fragrance par excellence, imposing mansions of enormous dimensions on tall turrets, lovely terraces, and gleaming domes. The Darbar Hall, which is the hall of a king, right? The literal hall where the king does his business and meets people, greets people, the greeting hall of the king, where beam forth scintillating gems and rubies of rare excellence, tastefully set on the floor and the pillars and the walls, excelling the best of each decorations anywhere elsewhere on this side of heaven. High-class curtains and canopies of rare excellence, recreation grounds set in exquisite surroundings, ever fresh and exhilarating, some of which are for the exclusive use of Lord Narayana and his consorts, steps paved with lustrous rubies leading to the tanks with delicious drinking water to the brim, filled to the brim, the favorite abode of regal swans and charming lilies, lotuses, etc., against the backdrop of humming bees intoxicated by the profusion of honey extracted from the honey-studded flowers of a vast variety and an infinite range of several other treasures, defying description, baffling the imagination, mental comprehension, and vocal appreciation of those on this side of heaven, including exalted personalities like Brahma, Rudra, etc., the glorious setting in which the lotus-eyed Lord, in his transcendental youth of exquisite charm and perennial youth, gorgeously attired in yellow silk robe and bedecked with many a jewel of rare excellence, is seen seated in all his might and majesty on the serpent couch, along with his divine consorts, surrounded by Senapati, Vishvaksena, the Lord's premier chamberlain, Garuda, etc., the eternal angels, Nityasuris, the Muktas, liberated souls, who render blemishless service to the Lord and thrive on it. The deep yearning of the supplicant to enter that holy gathering and render similar service to the Lord, stemming from his emulation of the devout, pining for such service with an ardor of the highest order, and finally, his surrender at the feet of the Lord after approaching him with the utmost reverence and entreating him at close quarters to enlist him in his diurnal service. Notes, the scriptures declare that the high heaven is characterized by Shuddhasattva, unalloyed purity. It is untainted by the inferior qualities of rajas and tamas, or passion and ignorance. Rajasa parake, tamasa paraspat. It is eternal beyond the mischief of pralaya, or dissolution, the deluge, when all the worlds on this side of heaven, with their variegated contents, mobile and stationary, are got sucked in or absorbed into the Supreme Lord within himself at the end of dissolution in this material world. It is projected by the will of the Lord in the form of magnificent towers and terraces, halls and mansions, etc., of limitless splendor, far surpassing the brilliance of the sun and other luminary bodies, which in fact owe their brilliance to the great Lord. It is of immeasurably vast. Being self-luminous, it manifests itself unaided by knowledge to the ever-free eternal angels, Nityasuris, and the emancipated souls, Muktas. It does not, however, manifest itself to the bound souls, the Buddha-jivas, still involved in the cycle of birth and death, even as the self-luminous knowledge of the individual souls gets blurred and dwarfed by their deeds, karma, in the pre-liberation period. Time, with its characteristic syndrome of alternation of day and night, seconds, minutes, and hours, ticking off all the time, the changing seasons, etc., has no part to play in the high heaven Sri Vaikuntha, where it is a perennial day, perennial spring season, and the denizens enjoy undying youth. His prayer, having been graciously heard by the Lord, the supplicant shall stay in heaven, duly discharging the appropriate duties assigned to him. The aphorism 5 describes how the supplicant who had stayed away far too long without partaking of the eternal bliss of the blemishless service to the Lord in heaven shall, in his newfound exuberance, keep drinking deep the nectarian bliss, the marvelous communication incessantly flowing from that inexhaustible fountain of bliss, Lord Narayana, without so much of batting his eyelid. This is only a thing that people do in the material world. Apparently, you can just keep looking at the Supreme Lord without blinking. So, aphorism 6, this envisions the grand finale. The awe-inspired supplicant standing in the immediate presence of the Supreme Lord is greeted by him with sweet looks and loving attention and beckoned to get near him. After the exhibition of such disarming simplicity, the Lord graciously sets his distress-dispelling lotus feet on the crown of the supplicant. Now in his close proximity, and lo, he becomes suffused with joy, and the very acme of that beatific bliss, or bliss of liberation, right? Contemplation by him of the entire scenario is that transcendental setting, and the grand consummation as above submerges him in exhilaration, par excellence, permeating his supernal frame from head to foot. Thus ends the Sri Vaikuntha Gadya. The student of Ubhaya Vedanta, the Sanskrit Vedanta, and its Tamil counterpart, known as the Dravida or the Dramida Vedanta, the prayers of the Alvars, will recall at this stage the inordinate yearning of Saint Nam Alvar at the zenith of his God love and God thirst in the ascending scale of Parabhakti, Paramagyana, and Paramabhakti. And then he quotes from Nam Alvar's Tiruvaimoli, and its eventual consummation by God as reflected by the very last decade of the last centum of Tiruvai Moli, the very last 10 verses of the last 100 verses of Tiruvai Moli, the hymn of unparalleled sweetness, eaten up by the cruel pangs of frustration. At that he was still lingering in this elemental or material body, made up of matter. The Alwar voiced forth his deep yearning, like the full-throated call for relief by one engulfed by wildfire. The merciful Lord of remarkable tenderness of heart felt even more depressed than the Alwar himself. The Lord cut out the Alwar's material contacts in toto and led him to the transcendental abode Sri Vaikuntham. There in the high heaven, the ultimate destination of the yearning soul, the Alwar, endowed with supernal body and ultimate and ultra-mundane or transcendental character, entered the august gatherings of the Nityas, eternal angels, and Muktas, liberated souls, and mingled with them freely, an event pined for by him since long. According to Namalwa's own admission, in the penultimate or the second to last song of the concluding decade of Tiruvai Moli, the Lord's love for him outgrew his own, making it dwindle down to naught in comparison. And he held him in his sweet embrace. And so this describes also what happens in the Vaikuntha Ekadasi festival at the end, the Namalwa Mokshanam, at the end of the recitation of all the Nalaya Divya Prabandhas. We see the deity of Namalwa go completely without any alankar, without any fancy dress, stripped to the waist like this, and he's placed in front of the deity of Namparamal, and he is tipped over so that his head is on the feet of the Lord in the 1,000-pillared mandam at Sri Rangam. And this is the scene from the Vaikuntha Gadya of Namalwar attaining liberation. And this is to be meditated upon by devotees every day, but also especially once a year during that festival, the festival of Moksha, this festival of Vaikuntha Ekadasi.
Okay, I don't, everything is very beautiful. I just have one doubt.
Sure.
That's in I don't know, maybe it's the first sloka or the invocation where Ramanuja speaks about
Bhakti Yoga.
He speaks about Bhakti Yoga. So why?
What he's talking about? He's talking about. It's an analogy, and he's saying, I dive deep into the ocean of Yamunacharya's instructions. In that ocean, I found a gem, like diving into the ocean and finding a pearl, right? I found a gem. That gem is bhakti. That gem is bhakti. But that gem is only realized because Ramanuja says that bhakti is constant meditation on the Lord. So bhakti yoga is a process which he talks about in other books like the Gita and whatever, Gita Bhashya and other things. But prapati only will bring you to the point of where you get liberation, and therefore you have this unending or unbroken concentration on the Lord. Even now, we have to sleep, we have to blink our eyes. In Vaikuntha, we don't blink our eyes, we don't have to sleep. We are constantly 100%. There's no passing away of time. So there is no time there. So it's just constant. The only place really for constant devotion to the Lord is in Sri Vaikuntha. That's what he's talking about when he says bhakti yoga there. Yoga there means union with God in the sense of total concentration on God, total meditation on God. And that can only be achieved in moksha. And that moksha can only be attained by prapati, like that. Now, Vadagalais, of course, will say that bhakti yoga is also a way to attain moksha. And some other people will say even jnana yoga, karma yoga, whatever. There's other ways to attain moksha. But Ramanuja here is talking later on in the same Gadyas, he's talking about prapati, that he has attained. He's saying, I can't possibly perform bhakti yoga, right? Because I don't have the qualification to it. I don't have the qualification to serve you. It's only by your grace, Sriman Narayana, that you can give me the qualification. I can pray for the qualification to serve you, but I can only attain that I can only attain the full qualification by your grace when I attain Sri Vaikuntha. So this is not to be understood. The word bhakti here is not to be understood as bhakti yoga. That he understood bhakti. Ramanuja preached about bhakti yoga, no doubt. But his idea of bhakti is the incessant, the full concentration on the Lord, which can only occur when somebody is in samadhi, when he's totally fixated on the Lord, like the pouring of oil from one container to another, the constant flow. There is no time. It doesn't look like there's any time. It's like time standing still. You pour oil from one vessel to another. This is what he talks about as being. He calls this bhakti. But we can understand that it is the culmination. There are these different stages, Parabhakti, Paramagyan, and Paramabhakti, like that. So there's these different stages, and ultimately the ultimate stage is actually explained here. So first there's a few different stages. There's the stages are explained here. The soul goes to Vaikuntha, the soul enters Vaikuntha and is greeted by all the residents there, and he goes to the 1,000-pillared mandap, and he sees the Lord sitting on the couch, Ananta, right? And he pays his obeisances to him, he pays his respects to him, and he prays to be enlisted. He prays to be given the service. He prays first of all to be given the qualification for service. So the Lord gives him the qualification for service, and then in order to show everybody that he's part of the serving team now, the Lord places his foot on the head of the person who's surrendering, and the person is then admitted. That at that time the person is admitted to being a servant, of the Lord. So he first of all gets the qualification from the Lord. He accepts the qualification of the Lord humbly, still thinking that he doesn't have the qualification. And then he bows to the Lord again, and the Lord's feet are on the person's head, and then forevermore he is in the Lord's eternal service. So this is what happened at the end of Namawa Moksham, at the end of the Vaikuntha Ekadasi festival. Namawa is brought, and his head is placed on the feet of Nam Perumal in the 1,000-pillared mandap in Sri Rangam, like that. And there's so much incense is there. There's so much incense going on. There's chanting of prabandhas and so many mantras and things like that. And people begin the archakas throw tulsi. They throw tulsi at the feet of the Lord, and so much tulsi is put there that that Namawa completely disappears. There's smoke and everything like this. All of a sudden, Namawa was placed at the feet of the Lord like this. All of a sudden, he disappears under a pile of tulsi at the feet of the Lord. So this is when the devotees see this, they think this is at the time of death. This is what happens. We will go to Sri Vaikuntham and we will attain the divine service of the Lord, and we'll be inseparable from the Lord and from his devotees in Vaikuntha like this. We'll disappear from the sight of materialistic people like us. It disappears. It's a wonderful thing to see. It's a fantastic experience to have. And Ramanuja is what they're trying to do is show you in the Vaikuntha Ekadasi festival in the Namawa Mokshanam day. They're trying to show you vividly what Ramanuja is talking about in the Vaikuntha Gadya. So anyway, there are many festivals in the liturgical calendar of Sri Rangam. The first one is coming up very soon. We have the Panguni Uttaram, which is the surrender. That is the scene of Sharanagati Gadya being enacted out loud, in being played. Make a play. If you take Sharanagati Gadya and you turn it into a play, you turn it into a deity festival. That is the Panguni Uttaram festival. And if you take Sri Vaikuntha Gadya and you turn it into a deity festival, that is the Namawa Mokshanam, which comes at the end of the year. So throughout the year, there are these different festivals. They all have it in very interesting, deep meanings, internal spiritual meanings the deity festivals have, and which we can relate to they all relate to the different things that were written by Ramanuja and the Alwars and all these things.
Om Namo Narayanaya. Om